Back in the 1970s, American philosopher Kenneth Boulding said, "Although I was born in 1914, I was actually born in about the middle of human history." Across millions of years of human history, how can history's midpoint be in the 20th century? The answer lies in the accelerating pace of change. The answer can be found in the fact that every trend in human history is accelerating exponentially. As you can see from the graph on your screen, if you are 15 years old, 99% of all mobile phones have been made since you were born. Also, if you are 25 years of age today, you have been around for 99% of the history of the Internet. Similarly, if you are 40 years old, 99% of all televisions have been produced in your lifespan. If you are 65 today, you are alive to see the development of weapons more destructive than all the weapons ever made. If you are 90 years old, you have seen virtually the entire development of radio, automobiles, and air travel. Take cars, for example. In the entirety of human history, as many cars were sold since 1990 as before. Thus, the middle of the history of the car was in 1990. Let's look at the curve for cars in more detail. In the year 1900, there were fewer than 10,000 passenger cars on the road worldwide, and none were made on an assembly line. In 1970, there were 170 million. In 1985, there were 375 million. In 1995, there were 500 million. In 2000, there were 600 million. In 2005, there were 700 million. In 2030, there will be 1.2 billion. For better or worse, cars have given us unprecedented ability to get from point to point quickly, have increased personal freedom and enhanced productivity, but cars have increased exponentially, leading to increased death, automotive gridlock, and global climate change. Most important of all, cars changed the entire course of human history. And imagine an economy without cars, or the layout of your town or city without cars. However, cars, these fixtures of our lives, have only been around slightly over a century. The exponential growth of cars occurred quickly, have become second nature, and changed global geopolitics irrevocably. Sadly, the same is true of weapons. We have more ability to destroy each other than ever before. At the first time the first atomic weapon was exploded at Los Alamos, we suddenly possessed more weaponry and power to destroy than in all of human history. If you are 65 years old today, more change in weaponry has occurred in your lifetime than in all of human history. Among the many exponential trends we are experiencing, human knowledge itself is doubling every few decades. In my own fields of communication, psychology, and health, as many studies have been published since 1990 as before 1990, and this is true throughout the sciences. Likewise, in medicine, most knowledge is less than 20 years old. If your doctor isn't under 40 years of age, just hope he or she has continued to take medical courses and read the medical literature. Young but experienced surgeons are the best because their schooling has included the knowledge explosion that occurred in the last couple decades. Despite national and class inequities, medical care has never been better. Over the past several centuries, life expectancy has increased throughout most of the world. This has improved the quality of life, extended working years, and increased productivity in much of the world. There is a downside to the incredible progress we have made in medical science and extending human life. The wonderful new medical practices and their cost may soon bankrupt many countries. Even in the affluent United States of America, medical costs are out of control, as can be seen from the table on your screen. From 1960 to 2003, per capita expenses increased in this country from 5.1% to 15.3% of the gross national product. New resource and technology management approaches, as well as network collaboration strategies, are urgently needed to prevent an exponential trend to develop. Extending life expectancy is not without its problems. One of the results of longer life and better health is the ongoing population explosion. The world has become so crowded that some countries like China have instituted one-child policies. Large urban centers like Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Los Angeles, Caracas, and Buenos Aires keep doubling in size. The evils of urban sprawl are occurring throughout the world. The result of population increases and migration from farm to city in many countries is astounding. In some U.S. cities, sprawl has created drives for urban commutes of several hours in each direction. Slower traffic, clogged city centers, air pollution, frayed tempers, stress, and increased land loss to roads have all resulted from sprawl. Investment in physical infrastructure, such as elevated highways, or in managing control, such as prohibiting certain cars and trucks from circulating one day a week, have become short-term aspirins for a longer-term problem that is only getting worse for all of us. Unfortunately, another trend that is dramatically increasing is global warming. Despite the reluctance of some leaders to recognize the causes and consequences of global warming, the global scientific community has reached consensus on 3 points. The world's temperature is increasing rapidly. Humans' release of carbon dioxide and other gases is a major contributor. The consequences of global warming are severe. What are the consequences of global warming? One of them is ice meltdown. According to scientists, global warming has caused the Columbia Glacier to retreat 7 miles in the last 20 years, leaving calves of ice in Prince William Sound. As the Earth warms, storms have increased and will be much more severe in the future, as illustrated by the Katrina hurricane of 2006 and its devastation of the city of New Orleans. Climate change associated with warming will doubtless continue, creating increased drought and floods, and will threaten crops. As once cold regions warm, insects like the bark beetle will expand their range, potentially devastating crops and forests. Currents like the Gulf Stream will be modified. Worst of all, melting in the polar regions will cause coastal flooding, where more than half of the world's population lives. While there may be some positive consequences as ice melts, like the opening of new trade routes such as the Northwest Passage, and accessing new mineral resources, in balance, global climate change is the greatest potential threat humans have ever faced. What can industry and business do to help avert global warming? I believe there are three key and urgent actions: limiting carbon dioxide emissions, downsizing vehicles, using insulation more extensively. What can society do in general? I believe we must first accept the challenge, and once we do, then we must reflect on everything we do in our lives that impacts this global problem, so that we can either modify the way we do it, if it is not something essential, or stop doing it altogether. The global population explosion has taken off only in the last 100 years. Despite valiant birth control programs around the world in recent years, the trend keeps growing exponentially, with many global economic, social, and political implications. For example, our capacity for global communication is also growing exponentially. The internet and cell phone, which have been around only for a few decades, are now a central feature of personal and professional life. It is impossible to do business today without the latest technology, but they too have brought us problems. Many of us today are inundated with internet spam, instant messages, voicemail, attachments, reports, and data. Information, which was once so scarce, is now called data smog and causes us to suffer from information overload. When people get more satisfaction from discarding messages than from receiving them, something is out of balance. Perhaps the most disturbing trend, according to a recent report from the World Bank, is that rich are getting richer and poor are getting poorer. Although global wealth is dramatically increasing, the vast majority of wealth is in fewer and fewer hands. And this is true both within most nations and between rich and poor nations. Sadly, poor developing countries are not catching up with richer ones. It is a fact that growth has accelerated in low and middle income countries, particularly since 2000. But unfortunately for the poorest countries, economic inequality has increased. It is evident that many countries have not entered the global marketplace. Interestingly, countries that trade the least fared worse, and their economies are doing poorly. Countries that opened up to trade had much higher growth rates. In conclusion, given the accelerated change illustrated by the exponential behavior of these and many other trends that affect our lives and our global society, today individuals, organizations, communities, and nations must all develop a new capacity to adjust, compete, and successfully manage these challenges with new strategies, tactics, and actions synchronized to this new environment. The first step towards this goal is to learn about three trends and change dynamics. A second step is understanding them individually and as a global system. And third, we must be competent in interpreting their impacts and consequences. Visioning our futures within this framework is now a necessity for performance and achievement in education, business, civil and military public institutions, and in society in general. This is not a trivial exercise. Individuals and organizations that excel in results today all have developed strong foundations and methods for their visioning processes at all levels. Let's learn from this fact. We can all make a special effort and assign the highest priority to this task. There is no doubt we now live in a demanding world of new communication and information technologies, knowledge explosion, and reinvention of governments and governed. A world where not developing new global competencies, such as distance collaboration and technology-based networking, is equivalent to being left out of new opportunities for progress and prosperity that the intense global dynamics offer to all of us. In another module, I will address how, in order to succeed, we can and must adjust to this unique era of human history, reaching across cultures, behavioral styles, economic and political rivals, and geographic barriers to engage in co-opetition rather than competition. Thank you.